I believe one of the biggest lies that people live with is that because we feel something, it must be true. And I think everything, if they start to believe that, it just completely distorts their next steps. So I say to people all the time, I say, feelings are real, emotions are real, yes, but that doesn't mean they're true. There's a difference between what's real and what's true.
Well, hey, everybody, and thanks for listening and joining us today. We hope that your 2021 is off to a great start, and we hope that this podcast can provide you with some insights to help you grow and get closer to your goals this year. Brian has a great conversation today with Chez Barbosa, where they talk about the things we think about and how to overcome stressors that can limit your success. But before we begin, I want to make sure you know about the successful retirement checklist that Brian put together for you. Part of being successful is asking great questions. Well, in this free PDF, Brian lays out for you the 5 questions to ask to make sure that you're safely set up for retirement. So if you're thinking about retirement or just want to be prepared, head on over to brianscribonia.com and just type in your name and email, and he will send the free PDF to you right to your inbox. So thanks again for tuning in, and let's get started.
Opportunities are still there.
The attempt at passing down wealth from generation to generation.
It's a gap between what you know and what you don't know.
And the whole teaching there is about preparedness and being ready.
There's a difference between what's real and what's true.
You're listening to the Common Sense Financial Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Scribonia. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get into today's topic. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Common Sense Financial Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Scribonia. I'm involved in financial matters nearly every day of my life, and it energizes me to be working with clients to solve problems and create strategies for generating the outcome the client's working towards. And I speak with dozens of clients each week, and one of the facets to the process I go through with my clients is how they respond to what is being discussed. People are unpredictable and they're complicated, making each person's journey through the planning process different from the next. The consulting side of what I do is second nature and comes relatively easy for me, but there is another side to all of this that at times can overshadow all the math and all the logic. And that other side is human behavior. You see, with math, there's a single outcome to an equation, but when you incorporate clients' opinions, fears, experiences, beliefs, and preferences, then things can become about emotion more than they can be about logic. So over the years, I've spent a lot of time studying human behavior and trying to figure out what makes people tick. And for me, it's not enough to simply know what someone thinks. I want to know why they think what they think and do what they do before trying to bring math and logic into the conversation. And the reason is that it's important to me is because people often make emotional decisions derived out of their beliefs and seldom make logical or rational decisions based on new facts or evidence. And these beliefs are carried around and can prevent someone from reaching the next level, not only financially, but with all areas of their life. The truth is that we all as human beings carry around this proverbial backpack of beliefs and emotions, and we carry it everywhere we go. And when we show up somewhere that's in a relationship, in a conversation, having to make a decision, we unpack the backpack. There's no hiding the backpack. It's with us all the time. And it is full of a lot of good things, but mixed in with it are limited beliefs that can wreak havoc with our decision making. These beliefs are just an accumulation of information that you either hear, you read, you experience that can have you instantly forming an opinion that then drives your behavior and decision making. It's what drives your thoughts, your opinions, your attitudes, and your propensity. Think about it. You eat bad sushi and then you get sick. A belief forms that sushi is bad and you throw that belief into the backpack. You go into a store and have a bad experience, new belief into the backpack. You meet someone for the first time and within 10 seconds, a belief is cemented in your head and into the backpack it goes. You hear a financial opinion, into the backpack. You do it constantly. And at times you may find your beliefs challenged, the way you think, your relationships, your attitude, your finances, and begin to question why you believe what you believe. But this isn't always a bad thing. Cleaning out the backpack of beliefs occasionally can prove to be a good thing when you can get rid of beliefs that are preventing you from making important decisions in your life. The psychology of why we do what we do is the topic of today's show. And here to discuss this with us is Chez Barbosa. Chez is going to help break all this down for us and offer some strategies and techniques that could possibly help you make some life-altering improvements. I've known Chez and his wife Charity for many years, and at one time even had him consulting with my company before he made the jump to where he is now. He's been married for 16 years and has 3 children. He's the CEO and co-founder of True Vine Christian Services, which is a 501c3 organization that offers professional mental health, mediation, and coaching services. He's a licensed counselor, specializes in marriage and family dynamics, along with communication and conflict resolution training. He's also very active in his community, serving as a board member and has leadership roles in other nonprofit organizations. And he earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Southwest Baptist University and his master's in counseling from Missouri Baptist University. Hey, Chez, welcome to the Common Sense Financial Podcast. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. So glad to have you on. I mentioned in the opening that we've, known each other for several years, and I'm just really pumped to have you on and have an opportunity to collaborate and just kind of talk this stuff through. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, happy to be here.
I'm really engaged, of course, in finance and I'm always reading, trying to learn things. But one of my second passions is just psychology and human behavior, because I feel like I'm in that business just as much as anything else. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So, our beliefs and the way we view the world and it transfers into every decision that we make. Right. So really looking forward to this. So anyway, but before we jump into that, if you don't mind, Chez, just kind of tell us a little bit about you and the path that led you to where you're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was growing up and as a teenager, I was the classic, which a lot of counselors, you'll hear them say, I was the kid everybody went to go share their problems with or just talk to. And, you kind of feel like, did I have a sign on my forehead that said, come talk to me? So we laugh in the counseling field because a lot of us kind of have that same background. But I knew at a fairly young age that I was going to pursue something with helping people. And I was really fascinated, like you, with psychology, with counseling, just with people. And so I knew I was going to do something in that vein. So as I kind of got older, I was looking at college and I knew psychology and was going to be the direction. But then as I got into school, I really kind of realized I wanted to walk with people, get in the trenches with them and actually try to help them navigate life. And so that's ultimately what kind of pushed me down the road of counseling, specifically in the mental health realm. So, pursued that, did a lot of school, a lot of training, pursued the licensure and then, didn't look back. And so counseling has always been a confident pursuit for me. There's been other things that I've done as well, but counseling has always been the constant. And I knew that was always going to be something that primarily I would be doing. And so that then, of course, morphed on into kind of growing some business aspect of nonprofit organization, kind of some ministry aspect. And so that morphed into some leadership roles and those kind of things. But, at the foundation has always been that desire to help people. And that's really where I would say kind of how I got in it and why I got in it. And then, the rest has just been continued development of that overall desire.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's part of why I have you here, because I know you do have a heart for people and you're a great communicator. And so I thought it just made a whole bunch of sense to get you on here. So I guess just jumping into it, and part of what kind of led me to get you on here is that, we live in this 24/7 news cycle, right? We're constantly, bombarded with political drama and now COVID, and just as a society, we're just stressed out, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. And, I routinely have conversations with clients who are motivated by fear and anxiety, and they just have this negative outlook on things. And you notice it too around just being around people. There's just this vibe, this sense, right, that things just aren't normal and maybe something's not right. So what are the signs of what I've heard you call a resting mindset of negativity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what I see a lot is people are constantly looking at the negative, the doom and gloom, the state of our economy, our government, now the election, COVID, 2020 has just been a rough year for a lot of people.
For sure.
Most people would give a loud, resounding amen to that. But what I see a lot is that resting negative mindset is basically a consumed mindset of all of the bad, negative, and primarily all the things that we can't control. And if anybody watches any news for any amount of time, we know that in the news, it's negative. I say a strong 99% of news reporting, unfortunately, is just negative. It's all the bad things going on. And so if we live in that world, if we live in the the doom and gloom, and also social media is just becoming rampantly negative as well, whether that's political or even personal, and people attacking each other, it's just getting out of hand. And so when that is consuming our mindset, it's a natural reaction for our brains to go to a negative resting point or place, and then everything stems from there. And so that consumption of negativity is honestly often more dangerous and impactful than the actual negative things going on around us, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Once you start looking through that prism of negativity, right, you just start seeing everything in a negative light. And so trying to find that sense of positivity is difficult. And it kind of leads into my next question. I mean, you and I have had these conversations in the past about belief systems and how that can be incredibly powerful. And it's part of what fascinates me about all of this type of stuff. But what I never really realized, as much as I do now and today, is that really a lot of the behavior and the mindset around those things, there is some control over that. I mean, we do have more control over that than we tend to think. And this may seem a little bit elementary to some people to say, well, what do you mean you can have, control over something? Well, if we understand that, right, our beliefs are really derived from our experiences. So if we're bombarding ourselves with negativity, our belief system is going to be negative. And the same as if we're always focusing on things that are positive, then things are positive. But going a step further, that belief system, whether it be negative or positive or whatever, it does have an influence on how we act, right? And how we make decisions, which really ultimately determines the results in our life. And so, but even for me, as somebody that's studied this stuff, of course, not as extensively as you have, but I've had coaching and I've read books and I'm just always intrigued by it. I still find it difficult, right, to recognize the patterns and the unhealthy mindset that follows, and trying to figure out, what needs to be adjusted and tweaked to get to the next place. So I guess the question comes to you then: how do people overcome these behaviors, these mindsets, to help enable them to reset their thinking and pull themselves out of that cycle?
Yeah, I hear that so often in counseling. I hear the yeah, I agree, it sounds good, but man, it's so hard.
Yeah.
And I say to them, yeah, I wish it was as easy to do as it is to sit here and say.
Right.
And I'll often tell my clients, as I'm saying things like, I understand that this is really easy to say and it sounds great on paper, and so that's a valid struggle. But often where I find myself, kind of answering that question or encouraging clients with that struggle is, it's not a new concept. It's discipline, right? It's the same struggle that we have with either exercise and fitness or eating right, or if you're in business and trying to be intentional about doing the steps in business that you need to grow your company, like all of that kind of anchors down to discipline, and it's hard. I mean, it is hard. And so I think there's a handful of ways that you can approach that. Accountability is one of them. Get some people around you, some cheerleaders around you to encourage you. Coaches are huge for that. If you're really struggling, counselors can of course help you through those kind of things. But my big thing, though, as far as the practical step to start with, is puzzle piece mentality. We often just try to approach the whole thing and just fix it. And we want it. Mm-hmm. We just have to overcome the whole thing. And that's so overwhelming, and it's immediately defeating. And so if you think about it like a puzzle, if you have a 5,000 piece puzzle, one small little puzzle piece seems and feels insignificant because it's just a blur. Like it doesn't even look like anything. It would be easy to look at that and think, well, if I lost this piece, I mean, it's not going to do anything. Well, It's interesting though, because while all the pieces are on the floor, they're not significant. But you put the rest of the puzzle together and then that one piece is missing. Now, all of a sudden, the most important part of that puzzle is the missing piece, which is that small insignificant piece. So if you look at it from that kind of perspective, that every step is necessary, but in order for a puzzle to be put together, especially if it feels like an overwhelming one, the little steps matter. And so taking little bite-sized steps is huge. Limiting your social media or your news intake, by one day less each week, you know what I mean? And then, or as you're going forward, an hour less a day. So thinking incrementally, and putting something in place of that. I'm a big proponent of like if you take something out, you got to put something else in there, So what is another positive that you can put in there as far as to try to balance that? So, there's not one answer, unfortunately. I wish there
Right.
I wish here, do that,
Yeah.
But what I have found that most people tend to resonate with is if you start talking about only discipline and all that, it discourages people. But if you start talking, I mean, it's true, but to give them something to start some momentum is what is one small thing you can do differently today that you haven't done, and then start to build that domino kind of feel. And then also helping them to think objectively on what that could look like. That starts to get momentum. And then, as you know, when you start getting momentum going, discipline gets a little easier and a little easier and a little easier, and then becomes a habit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got to start with the puzzle piece approach.
Yeah. The whole idea of going back to that idea of the belief system, which is the foundation, I think, of kind of what you're saying, is that, about a year ago, I quit watching the news, which sounds crazy. But I just stopped watching. I just felt like it was, weighing on me, because I get caught up into things like that. And it was just irritating. And so I just decided one day, I'm not watching this stuff anymore. And so, I have other sources that I get my news from to stay abreast of things, but just sitting there watching that continuous negativity became overwhelming. And the problem with that is, you get into conversations with people and they're doing the same thing. And so it just fuels that anxiety and that fuel. And so, I think, and you said a key thing is that if you take something away, you need to fill it back in with something, because something will backflow back into it. It's like putting your foot into a bucket of water and pulling it out. It's going to fill back in.
Mm-hmm.
And so creating those experiences to create a different belief, a different worldview, right? A different perspective on things, to try to just make things positive.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I totally agree that, none of that is easy. Just trying to have a different experience, different mindset, different thought process around the whole thing. Right.
Yeah.
Well, just shifting gears a little bit, you and I have talked about this before, and I've heard it said, and I've read this a lot of times, but the way I understand it anyways, is that, sex and money are two of the main causes of marital problems, which most often stems from a communication issue.
Mm-hmm.
So couldn't it be said, though, that, communication really is the root of nearly every problem in relationships?
Yeah, I believe so. That's often what I share with my clients and anyone that I'm talking with on this topic. I think that communication is the foundation that everything builds on. Even if you understand conflict, interpersonal conflict, most of that is due to unmet needs. Not all, but most of it. And so if you understand that, usually what it points back to is that there was ineffective communication, miscommunication, misunderstanding, poor delivery. There's aspects of it, but ultimately it does. It boils down to just communication not being good. When people say either sex or money or this topic, those are more sensitive topics, and those are harder to navigate for sure. But they still rest on communication, because at the end of the day, it's still what do you need or want in these areas, and so or what's hurting you. And so when people don't know how to communicate, it gets very, very distracted from what the actual core issue is. And they end up fighting about things that aren't even going to change the scope of the subject anyway. So I always say everything starts, it rises and falls on communication. The saying is everything rises and falls on leadership. I say everything rises and falls on communication is equally as important, because that's where everything starts and clarity happens and needs often start to become met.
I think just like with decision making, right? And I said this in the opening, is that, people tend to throw logic out the window in most situations. They go with what they call their gut feeling, or they go with just some emotion that drives them, right? Whether it's right or wrong, and for me, whether the math adds up 2 + 2 = 4 or not, it's how somebody feels about something. So even in communication, wouldn't you say that it's the kind of the same thing, is that, trying to have a foundational conversation, it's still rooted in emotion as opposed to logic, right? And so, what are the steps, I guess, that you could call them, that couples should take to open up communication without emotion and get on the same page.
Yeah. And before I kind of get into the steps, just to support what you're saying, just look around right now, right? Just look at our society, of how devastating that being driven by feelings can result in, and it's almost this twilight zone that you find
Right.
yourself in. And so I believe one of the biggest lies that people live with is that because we feel something, it must be true. And I think everything, if they start to believe that, it just completely distorts their next steps. So I say to people all the time, I say, feelings are real, emotions are real, yes, but that doesn't mean they're true. There's a difference between what's real and what's true. Now, I know you can go on to a whole different realm of, truth and absolute truth and relativism and all that, but let's not overthink it for the sake of philosophizing and just say, hey, there's a difference between truth and real. And when you can understand that, there's an anchor, there's a foundation point that can help you navigate. Most of us are creatures of emotion, and we do horrible at managing emotion because it feels so strong that it must be real. And so, it must be true. So everything starts to stem off that. Well, get back to your question. We see the similar thing in marriage, even, or in relationships, is that, well, I feel this, or it feels like you think this about me, so it must be ... Fight ensues, and then it goes down that road, and it's not even remotely what they should be focusing on. And so feelings are often very distracting, very, very distracting. They deceive us, they misdirect us. And so I always say feelings are important. I'm not minimizing them. They give you kind of a temperature of what's going on, but they don't ever need to be the final deciding factor. So some things that people can do is, objectivity is huge. Like whether, depending on your need, whether that's a marriage coach, a marriage counselor, or maybe even like a relationship coach, or sometimes, I'm going to say this carefully, sometimes even friends, not counseling. Don't go to your friends for counseling, but just to give some objective perspective on something. So objectivity becomes helpful in that capacity because it helps you see and kind of step back and look at some things differently. But if somebody can't navigate past that, go see a counselor. Like there's this huge stigma about counseling, marriage counseling, that it's only for either crazy people or marriages that are really in the rocks and facing divorce and all that. And while we certainly see a lot of that, state in marriage, it's also for people that just want to get ahead of it and just work through some conflict and have that power of objectivity. So that's a big one. And then another area I would suggest is change how you listen to each other. That's big. We often listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And so we're just thinking about what we want to say, and we're not really actually hearing what the other person is trying to convey. So change how you're listening. Change to try to listen to what is their hurt, what's their need, not listen to what they seem to be accusing you of or making you feel like they're saying. Trying to push into that. I'll be honest, that takes some training. It takes some skill. Like not everybody's good at that. Our flesh doesn't typically like that. But when you can learn how to change your listening, it can really change that dynamic, because then it gets back into communication. Yeah, there's a lot of other things that you can do. Those are just a couple like initial things that I think are huge game changers.
Yeah. You said a key thing there that got my attention is that the stigma that goes along with especially marriage counseling or any type of counseling, I guess. But, I've had business coaches for years, right? I've paid lots of money to these guys to try to just help me with how I think and how I view things, and of course the intricacies of how the business is run, et cetera. But it doesn't mean that necessarily something's wrong. You're just trying to get to that next level. And so when you said that, I thought to myself, marriage counseling could be just a form of coaching, right? Almost like how you get a car tuned up. You just need to be, because there may not be really anything major wrong, but hey, if nothing changes, nothing changes, right?
Right.
And so to try to just get that to that next level to make things even better, possibly, considering something like that. That's interesting. I never really looked at specifically marriage counseling as something that could just be a fine tuning thing, not a way to dig out of a hole.
Yeah. And I think it's a total paradigm shift that has to continue to, and we're getting better at it. Like when I say we, I mean, our society, counseling is really, the stigma is really being challenged and addressed. And that's awesome just for counseling as a whole. But I still think there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding on what all goes into it, like you're saying. And I have a lot of married couples that even as they'll either come in for counseling and just say, hey, we feel like we have a good relationship, or we want a great relationship, or we've had a couple things that we want to get ahead of it before it gets bad. And on the other side, couples that have come in devastation, helped them through, and they're in a better place they've ever been. But they'll say, we call it maintenance counseling. We want to still stay like once every couple months just to check in, make sure things are going well, because we want to stay ahead of that. So it's a total paradigm shift on how to look at it. And when people start to do that, it can really change the impact it can have and the purpose that it takes on. Because you're right. If you say to somebody, hey, do you have a business coach? Nobody's going to be like, oh no, I don't want that. Most people are like, no, yeah, that would be expected. If you want to do well in business, have a business coach, So it's just a paradigm shift that we have to continue to keep educating.
It is, but it goes back to the foundation of everything we're talking about. It's the belief system.
Yeah.
It's our way of viewing the world and how we stigmatize different things. Now, of course, money is the focus of this podcast, right? And we all know that there can be many emotions about either having it or not having it, which can lead to poor decision making, when there's desperation trying to get money, or if there's this fear. I've always found that people are either they're stressed out about getting money, and then once they have it, they're stressed out about losing money. Mm-hmm. So that money relationship is a tricky one if it's not managed. And I think a lot of people really, really do struggle with that. So much like a relationship with a spouse, our relationship with money is important to manage, because it could become unhealthy really, really fast, right? So what are some of the few things that people can do to kind of examine their relationship with money? If we can separate it from marriage counseling for a minute and get to the relationship with money, which may seem odd, but I think there's a lot of parallels there, right? Maybe not in the communication, but how we think about it.
I'd say there's a lot of parallel on both sides for sure. Like we were saying, if it ties to emotion, money, as you're saying, like there is a lot of emotion tied into money. And whether that's afraid of not having enough, or afraid of losing, afraid of retirement, afraid of college for your kids, like all these, it's one of those topics that really, really touches deep internally, that has a very large emotional effect on people. So yeah, it starts to bleed out in communication and priorities and needs and expectations, and it gets messy. It gets real messy real quick. So I think a couple things that can be really encouraging for people is to say, okay, you know what? Let's take our focus off the emotion for a second. Let's take our focus for a minute off of what's the best way to utilize your money and what do you need to do? I mean, you got to figure that out. Yeah. But the first thing is, let's get on the same page with what is your expectation of money? What's the purpose of money? Not the best way to invest in any of that initially. It's just getting people to understand, like, what do you see the purpose of money being? Because I think sometimes what happens a lot is that people are arguing, and they're coming at money in two different perspectives and expectations, or the priority order, or the purpose of it. And they kind of gets back to communication. They're fighting about trying to convince the other person what's the best thing to do with money. And they get lost in the weeds about either bills or investment or saving or retirement or whatever is necessary at their season of life. But really it's about, like, are we on the same page with how we need to approach this resource? So, I would even say, if this makes sense, come back off of the focus of money and let's reestablish are we on the same page with what our expectation for money period is, and where it needs to sit in the priority of our life. Too often, as you see, people allow money to just drive and control them. I'm not judging them on that. I mean, it's hard not to in our world. It really is, first world problem, right? But I think there's some initial things that you have to look at first. And when you can have some clarity and some same pagedness especially with a significant other, that immediately builds confidence, and it restores some hope of, like, okay, we're on the same page here. Now let's look at the nuts and bolts. At that point, I kind of look at it. My job is to help them get to what I just said. And then I give them some resources about, now, if you need help to just how to put your dollars where and what the best way to strategize about that is, there's professionals that do that. Like, go talk to a financial coach, go get somebody objectively to help you figure out how to plan for that. But first, go in with the same page understanding of what your goals are, not your financial goals, but the goals emotionally together in the role of this purpose. That gives a lot of clarity and confidence. Even if they walk in and they're like, yeah, there's not enough dollars there yet, at least they have some hope that we're on the same page here. We don't feel like we are against each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, two things come out of that in my mind. So, a lot of times, because opposites attract, I guess that's a thing, but that's what we hear is that, one is maybe really frugal with money and the other is very free willing, let's call it, with money. So, one, their security is more tied to money and having the money. And then for the other one, not so much, right? They're more adrenaline driven, I guess, with the purchase or whatnot, which can lead to regret on the other side of that. But trying to bring, especially if there's really polar opposite on that, trying to bring them together to try to at least see each other's point of view and find a middle ground, right? So, is there any tricks to the trade there as far as trying to compromise in something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. We probably see about 80% of couples that one's a spender and one's a saver. It's just, it is far more rare for both of them to be the same of either one. So it definitely makes for some fun conversations for them. And so one of the first steps I tell people to on the path to compromise is let go of the idea that it will ever look exactly how you want it to look when it comes to money. You have to first let that go, because too many times we come into those conversations with each other saying, almost with this subconscious idea that I need to try to convince them to see it my way. So if for example, I'm a spender and they're a saver, I'm trying to convince them to see how spending is the better way to do it. And they're doing the same thing with me on saving. So then we just argue about who's right. And so I tell couples, if you want to compromise, you have to let go of the idea it will ever look exactly how you want it to look. And then you can start building from there. And if both of you can also, secondly, give as much as you can and take as little as you can, then you'll find more of that middle ground to where you can end up with something you're both okay with. But it's a mindset preparation that they have to enter that conversation with. It's not about who's right or wrong, because you can honestly make a case either way and pros and cons either way. But if your goal is to try to convince the other person who's wrong or right, you'll both fail. You won't get anywhere, because then you just stand in your corners and you just keep going round after round. So let go of the idea it'll ever be exactly how you want it to be, and give as much as you can, take as much or as little as you can. And then you'll often find yourselves in a much more compromised middle ground that's attainable.
Another thing, I guess, that stems off of that is, and you and I have had this conversation before, is with clients that, a lot of people think about retirement, right? I think people at any age is dreaming of the day when they can stop working, right? That's always this euphoria, this thing that we want to try to achieve. So, but for the people that actually start to arrive at that place, right? So they get closer and closer to retirement. Some people realize it at different stages, but there's some anxiety around that. So you think that would be a freeing thing that happens, but what happens actually is that they're still grounded in their employment. They're still, their purpose is still found in what they have always done. And sometimes that can be for 40 or 50 years, right? And so the idea of actually retiring and then living off of, assets or pensions or whatever, I find sometimes that clients struggle with finding new purpose, right? Do you have any thoughts on that and how people should think through that and maybe overcome some of those feelings of lostness, I guess is the way to put it?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. That's such a hard transition. I think the first thing I help people see is that that's not actually about money or retirement. That's about identity. Somewhere along the line, we believed all of a sudden that we're defined by what we do, not who we are. And don't get me wrong, what we do is a part of who we are, but it's not definitively who we are. So when we surrender to that or just accept that at some point, that usually happens in kind of midway through career, not just jobs, but career. Like that's really what you do. We just kind of at some point adapted that this is who I am. So we see this a lot, especially with men, because men are far more statistically bad at relationships and they bury themselves in work. So we see this often more on the men's side that they just, retirement's terrifying for them because, like you said, that purpose. And so helping them understand to basically either maybe discover for the first time, who really are they? Like, how do you understand identity? What defines that? What is purpose still in life outside of work? Help them. Sometimes they don't even know how to look for that. So there's a lot of education and reprogramming, basically, to sum it up. You gotta help people understand, like, you're looking at this in a different perspective. The priorities are flipped. It's an identity issue, not a. You got to know your enemy here. It's not about money at this point, or retirement investment or assets. It's about who are you, not what do you do. And just a lot of education that comes with that, giving them the tools on how to learn that, how to see it, how to identify what is still around them that's far more valuable than work, and what kind of a legacy or impact are they leaving. So broadening that paradigm shift is key, but it's very hard for people because, as you know, we get very tunnel vision, and that's what we do, especially a 30, 40-year career, that like, that's all eat, breathe, and sleep it. Wake up the next day, and then all of a sudden, I don't have to do that anymore. What's life supposed to look like now? So it can feel very daunting, but there's always hope in that. It's just about learning a new perspective on how to take on this new season. And then lastly, with understanding that, when I found an immense amount of peace when I learned how to look at life in seasons, that not everything is the way it needs to be forever. That's overwhelming. So when you understand that everything happens in seasons, that just changes some perspective. It's not this way forever, and there's a new season. So there's a time for new to anticipate. But if you're in a rough season, doesn't mean it's going to have to be that way for the rest of your life, and it can feel that way. So bottom line, kind of reprogramming, educating, and challenging their perspective is some big key points on how to work through that.
Yeah, I'm guessing part of that, and this is kind of the angle I take when I'm talking to clients, because it is part of our I guess our consulting, is to say, hey, look, you're going to be retiring in this many days or this many months or whatever. Have you thought about what you're going to do? Mm-hmm. Chances are when you think about retirement, it's vacations. It's not sitting on the couch eating potato chips, but those vacations are going to eventually stop. It's not going to be this 30, 40 years of vacations. So how are you going to be spending your time? Because that also comes into play with how we're managing their cash flow and their budgets. And because we got to incorporate those types of things. You're going to play golf every day. And so understanding those types of things, I think, is going to help with the mental side of it as well. Mm-hmm. Just having a purpose, having a plan. It boils down to just having a plan, I guess. Mm-hmm. There's so many rabbit trails we could chase with all this, right? I mean, there's just so many things you could talk. We talked a lot about marriage stuff, and I think it's critically important. Tying that into some retirement stuff, which I think is great. But I guess, and sometimes we can even look at, and kind of goes back to what we say in the stigma when we talk about counseling. In some way, we always it kind of gets skewed to this idea of a problem. Mm-hmm. Right. And of course, we all have problems all the time with different things, but it's just focusing on that problem instead of having the mindset of, hey, we're trying to get to that next level. Mm-hmm. We're trying to get to that better place. Right. So things may be okay, but we're just trying to get to that next place. Right. So anyway, I guess before we wrap up, is there if somebody's listening to this that may be struggling with some of these areas and could use some encouragement, what would you say to them?
Yeah. The loudest message to hear initially is there's always hope. There's always options. Even if you can't see or feel that, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And so if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling stressed, which sums up for a lot of people 2020, just know that just because like I said earlier, just because you're feeling that doesn't mean it's true. It's real. I'm not discounting your emotion, and all of us can resonate to some aspect of that. It's especially been a rough year. And so for a lot of people, that means significant life change. And so while that's definitely real and present, it does not mean that is your dictator for where you're going and what the future needs to look like, or that you don't have a way out, or that there's no way to overcome that. And so to know that there's always hope and there are resources out there. Sometimes when we're feeling so overwhelmed, we don't know where to turn with it. So reach out to people that care about you, reach out to your friends and family, not to fix it, but just to maybe help you identify some of the steps you can take and some resources to connect you to. And just know, like I said, we live in a world of it's good and bad, technology and information's at our fingertips. That's bad in a lot of ways, but it's also immensely valuable in that we can just research all kinds of things here. So we have access in a way that we never have. And so even if, you're not ready to go be in person with somebody, like there's technology and there's virtual platforms. So bottom line, there are many ways that you can get help. It's not the end of the road. There's not a hopeless dead end here. And don't let your feelings dictate what your next steps need to look like. There are things that can help, and there are things that can be done no matter what your situation is. And just because you feel something doesn't automatically make that true or false. You got to also challenge what is true. So you're always ultimately able and capable of taking control of what you feel and what's going on around you. Sometimes you just need some help doing it. And so just know it never has to feel like it's dead end.
Yeah, that's a key thing there. And we talk a lot about this with clients is that, hey, a lot of times we worry about the things that we have no control over. So if we spend our time focused on the things we do have control over and making those things great, some of that other stuff fades into the background, right?
Absolutely.
Man, I really appreciate you coming on. I think the time spent was well worth it. I hope people get a lot out of this. I know a lot of people are thinking these things or struggling with these things, and just having that little bit of hope and also some practical ways of pulling out of that, I think is great. So Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. If you have questions about what you heard about today, or if you'd like to connect with Chez, go to my website at brianscribonia.com. Follow the steps to connect with us on the consultation page. That concludes today's podcast. I'm Brian Scribonia, and thank you for listening to the Common Sense Financial Podcast.
Well, thank you for listening to the Forbes Top 10 rated Common Sense Financial Podcast. Before you go, I want to encourage you to jump over to brianscribonia.com to access the full archive of blogs and podcasts. And if you want to be the first in line to get new content, you can sign up for free on the Brian Scribonia website as well. If you're not following Brian on all the social channels, we'd love to have you join in on the conversation. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, he's there. Lastly, if you've enjoyed listening to today's podcast, or if you have found value in any of our content, help spread the word by sharing our videos, podcasts, and posts wherever you get them. We greatly appreciate it and are glad that you took the time to join us today.